So here's the first page of problem set number 6. And what I'm going to do is I'll pick out a couple of these examples and then I'll work ones that are just like it, but just slightly different. So for example, I'll do this one, but I'll just change it to cosine. So for number 1, what if it's 2 minus 3 cosine of x equals 0? And then find all the solutions between 0 and 2 pi. The first thing we need to do is isolate the cosine. So have it say cosine equals a number, and then we could use cosine inverse. First, subtract 2 from both sides. Next, divide both sides by -3, and then the negatives are going to cancel, and it's just going to say cosine of x is equal to 2/3. Now what I like to do is use the graph. So here's the graph of cosine. And then when is it equal to 2/3? So on the y-axis, 2/3 is approximately right here. 2/3. And then if you draw a line straight across, there's going to be 2 solutions. The first solution comes from the calculator when you find cosine inverse of 2/3. When you use the calculator, it's only going to give you one solution, and it will give you the solution that is closest to the origin. So it's going to find this one. Also make sure that the calculator is in radians because the directions said 2 pi, which is radians. Cosine inverse of 2/3 equals this decimal. Then, to find out if that's like pi over 7 or something, go like this. Divide it by pi. So don't type the decimal, but just hit the divided key. Divide by pi. And then math, change that to a fraction. Now, if it gives me a fraction like 1/7, then I know that this is pi over 7. But if it gives me a decimal, that means it was impossible to find a fraction. So you just use the 0.841 as one of the solutions. So x equals 0.841. That's for this answer. Now, what about this answer? Well, the graph is symmetric. So if this is a gap, this little red line is a gap of 0.841, then this one is the same size, 0.841. And this answer is to the left of 2 pi. So that means it's going to be 2 pi minus 0.841. So 2 pi minus the 0.841. So the second solution is 5.442. Now, I'm pretty sure that that's correct, but what I'm going to do is graph the original problem and then see if my answers are correct. So graph 2 minus 3 cosine of x, and then change the window to go from 0 to 2 pi. And I'm looking for when it's equal to 0, so I'm just going to put -2 to 2 for the y values. And then there should be 2 times when it crosses the x-axis. There's 1, and there's 2. So 0.841 should be one of them. Trace 0.841 should be that answer. Excellent. And 5.442 should be that answer. Perfect. So these are the 2 solutions. And now for example number 2, I will just pick, let's say this one right here, except instead of using tangent, I'm going to use sine. So for example number 2, 7 minus 2 sine squared. And then I was just thinking about this part. If you go 7 minus 2, the very smallest to get is 5. And if you go 7 plus 2, the biggest it gets is 9. So this is going to range between 5 and 9. So the 4 is not going to work. Between 5 and 9, I'll just pick 6. Now when you're solving trig equations, there can be more than one answer. And in order to see how many solutions there are, I'm going to graph this. So one equation is going to be the left side, and then the other equation is going to be the right side. And then, how many times do they intersect? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm looking for 4 solutions. Okay. Now start doing some algebra, like subtract 7 from both sides. And then 6 minus 7 will be a negative 1. Next, divide both sides by negative 2. And when you divide this by negative 2, the negatives will cancel and it's just equal to a half. And then square root both sides and make sure that when you do the square root on the right side, you put both the plus and minus. So really this is now 2 problems. Sine of x equals the positive square root of a half. Or the other possibility is sine of x is equal to negative the square root of 1/2. This will give us 2 solutions, and this will give us 2 solutions, so then we'll have 4 solutions. So if I do sine inverse, of 1 divided by the square root of 2. It gives me a 0.785. And I'd like to see if that is pi over something. So I'll divide it by pi and then go to math, convert that to a fraction. It's actually pi over 4. So x is equal to pi over 4. And I have a feeling that this one is probably going to be negative pi over 4. Sine inverse of negative 1 divided by the square root of 2. Yep, that's negative of the same thing. It is negative pi over 4. Now because these both say sine equals, I could then look at the graph of sine. So from 0 to 2 pi, that looks like this. So right there's 2 pi, right here's pi. And one of them says, when does it equal a positive 1 over the square root of 2? So here's the positive 1 over square root of 2, and if you draw a line straight across, 2 solutions. And one of them is going to be the pi over 4. So this one is pi over 4. Now with this negative pi over 4, like I mentioned earlier, the calculator, when you do sine inverse or cosine inverse or tangent inverse, it finds the answers that are closest to the origin. So what it did, when I told it the negative 1 over the square root of 2, it went this way, and then it found that x equals the negative pi over 4. So what you do is just take the negative off, and pi over 4 is the reference angle. So if you make this line go straight across, then this answer is to the right of pi, so that means it's pi plus pi over 4. And this answer is to the left of 2 pi. So that would be 2 pi minus pi over 4. And this one, well, it's to the left of pi. So it's going to be pi minus pi over 4. So finally, what are those actual answers? So we already got x equals pi over 4. That's one of the answers. This is a whole pi, and then somebody ate a quarter of it. So what would be left? 3/4. So 3 pi over 4. And then if you have a dollar and you add a quarter, so that would be 4/4 plus one more is 5/4. X equals 5 pi over 4. And then this would be 8/4 minus 1, so that's 7/4, or 7 pi over 4. And finally, I could just go back to the graph and check it. So this intersection, that should be pi over 4. Correct. The next one will be 3 pi over 4, so that should be this one. Correct. Then 5 pi over 4 should be this third one. Perfect. And finally, 7 pi over 4. There we go. 4 answers.